Hi, everyone, and welcome. Um, we know you're joining from different zones and different places, so we're grateful you're spending this morning or noon or afternoon with us. Before we begin, a quick note that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be shared with the registrants after this webinar. And welcome again to the View from Here webinar. I'm Gada, the Resource and Training Director at Re.Climate. And a quick word about who we are. The Re.Climate team are spread across the country. We work and learn and collaborate across different many lands and territories, and we offer our thanks to all the indigenous generations who have taken care of these lands. And particularly, I would like to acknowledge the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people and thank them for their stewardship of where I'm joining from. I'll invite everyone to, as already some doing so, to share where they're joining from, their names and their organization. It's really helpful to know who's in the room. At Re.Climate, we provide resources and training and strategic guidance to our network of more than 5,000 people across Canada. And our work focuses on strengthening evidence-based communication, improving practice, and convening spaces for collaboration across different sectors and perspectives. Well, as many of you know, many of our webinars actually focus on a specific topic or a tool, a piece of research, and today is a little bit different. We can't deny that climate communicators now are in a moment that is shaped by many things, a lot of uncertainty, economic pressures at home, growing security tensions, and a wider sense that everything is shaking under our feet. So we really wanted to create the space to just step back, to look at the last year and honestly the few years before and listen to people who are deep in the work, experts and leaders across the climate field who are living this moment every day. So we wanted to hear how they are reading this moment, what they are noticing on the ground, what's shaping their thinking, what's puzzling them, and what's still giving them hope. In the first part of the webinar, we'll ask our experts a few questions. If you have questions for them, please put them in the Q&A feature below, and we will try to ask them these questions in the second half of the webinar. The chat function is a space for you to share your insights and comments. And again, the QA is where we will direct your inquiries to our panelists. Now we have with us today Amber Bennett, our Re.Climate Executive Director. Amber is one of Canada's top climate communication strategists and capacity builders. She works with groups across the country, bridging the gap between research and practice. Amber led the groundbreaking Alberta Narratives project and supported much of the foundation work to pilot and establish Re.Climate. We also have with us Jamie Biggar, who's the co-founder of My Climate Plan. Jamie had a long record of co-founding high-impact organizations, and he served as the global leader for the of the country-based teams at change.org, and overseeing their work and also helping people around the world to win their campaigns in 2021 and onwards. We have with us also Mackenzie Burnett. She's a community organizer based in Saskatoon and works at the front lines of climate and social justice as the assistant Anglophone coordinator at the organizing hub, where she supports and trains organizers doing this work on the ground. She's also a member of the Climate Justice Saskatoon and co-founder of the Saskatoon Climate Hub. And we have Seth Klein. Seth served as the Director of Strategy at the Climate Emergency Unit. He works as a freelance policy now consultant, and he is the author of A Good War mobilizing Canada for the climate emergency. Seth also is a regular columnist with Canada's National Observer and an adjunct professor with Simon Fraser University. And we have with us David McKie, who's the managing editor of Canada's National Observer, overseeing news and opinion writing from Ottawa. He's an award-winning author and journalist and spent 20 years at the CBC. He teaches at the Schools of Journalism at TMU, Carleton University, and King's College. We're really lucky to be with this group and truly excited for this conversation. I'll start with you, Seth. With this question, you have just closed the Climate Emergency Unit and shared a report which reflected on its contributions. And you were open about its achievements, but also its limits. What can you say about what the climate movement should take forward and what should it let go based on how you're reading the moment and your 5-year work leading the Climate Emergency Unit?
Sure. Thanks, Gada, and hello, everyone. It's great to be with you, joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. This is going to be fun, I think. It's great to have a chance to start the year off with some reflections. Thank you, Gada, for plugging that final report of ours. I'm going to throw the link to that report in the chat right now. As you say, just to clarify, the Climate Emergency Unit closed in December by design. It was always intended to be a 5-year project. That was the model. And in this report that you've mentioned and I've just shared, our whole team, we tried to be really honest in our assessment of what worked and what didn't work. Overall, our mission was to press for wartime scale climate actions and policies. And our work was premised on this assumption that if we're actually going to bend the curve at speed and scale, at pitch and pace, it's going to require state leadership and the establishment of these brash new public programs and new public enterprises to drive that change. So by any honest assessment, I would say that our 5-year mission was a failure. I didn't think it was going to be like that. I mean, I certainly thought by 2025, given the extreme weather events that we've had, um, I don't think any of us would have expected uh, that we would be where we are and where so many of our governments would be acting like a bunch of surrender monkeys on the task of our lives. Um, I think we really struggled with. I guess the wall that we most frequently confronted, I would say, and this was true both engaging with elected officials and leaders, but also within our own movement, is this failure of imagination. We'd hit this wall where we would run up against our collective loss of faith in our capacity to do great things together. So that was a piece of it. So what are we letting go of? I mean, we're letting go of the whole thing. As I say, part of what we have been urging is to stop doing what isn't working, and we've hardwired that into our own DNA. That said, we're leaving behind a bunch of resources, including the one I just offered. And some of our campaigns are continuing, like the BC Climate Emergency Campaign and the Youth Climate Corps campaign. And we are going forward with some lessons and learnings a couple of which I'd like to offer. The first is this: we need to make links to other crises. Often I hear this sentiment like, oh, 2019, it was youth-led, and where'd all the young people go? Well, the young people haven't been dormant. They've been mobilizing on Gaza, and more recently in opposition to Trump, and in the States, they're tackling ICE and defending migrants. I think part of the learning here is that people are always going to prioritize the crises that are most proximate in space and time. So it's only natural that they're going to prioritize the affordability crisis, the
Mm.
everyday crisis of getting by, as Avi Lewis has been talking about, the Gaza crisis, Trump. But the point, though, isn't to go quiet on climate. The point is that we have to make common cause. I think we saw a taste of this in the Draw the Line mobilizations in the latter part of last year. The point is, don't ask people to choose between the emergencies and crises that they face, link them together. That's part of the ongoing promise of something like the Green New Deal. When you link economic challenges with climate challenges, the support for both increases. And I think we also learned that it's possible to still have some wins. We did have a win late in the year on the Youth Climate Corps. So persistence and creativity and mobilization and coalition building can still pay off. Um, I think we also learned, all of us, how quickly the political terrain can shift. We started 2025 assuming that Pierre Poilievre was going to have a majority government. Um, as depressing as it's been watching Trump, we also late in the year saw this incredible win from Mamdani in New York City. Some of the thousands of the very same young men in particular who voted for Trump 12 months earlier also voted for this guy. And who would have guessed that people would be mobilizing in defense of migrants in Minneapolis and other places in the States? Like, it's all so unpredictable. The final lesson, and I know I'm going long, is that we should not go quiet on climate. Um, when you dig into the polling, I think what you see is that people are still very worried about the climate crisis. But this is the key but, they feel themselves isolated in harboring that sentiment. And so we need to signal to them that they're not alone, and talk about climate more, not less, but we have to talk about it differently in a less wonky, technocratic way. We need to captivate people with exciting ideas. And I also think we need to propose things that aren't incremental. I think we've done ourselves
Mm.
a disservice, because those incremental solutions don't feel credible when people understand the crisis to be as big as it is. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you. So just like, just reflecting quickly on what I heard, mobilizing is still there. People want to mobilize. Climate is concern is still there. We need to be louder about it and connect more horizontally with other issues and things that matter for people at the moment. I wonder, Jamie, how's your reading of the moment? When, given what Seth has described, lack of action from politicians, there's distracted public attention. What's still standing, and what has changed, and what as a result has shifted in your work?
Great. Thank you so much, Gada. And I want to just start off by saying like a huge thank you to Re.Climate for hosting this. Really, really the leadership role that you are playing in bringing us together across the climate movement. And that's so much of what we need right now. As Seth was speaking to people feeling alone, it is so important to feel connected and to feel together. So what I want to start with, I'm going to start a bit about the moment and then some like specific examples of where we're seeing this in our work, what has been true in 2024 and 2025 and can continue, and what are some of the shifts in 2026. And what I want to start with is let's talk about yes. So let's talk about our yeses and let's talk about owning our yeses. And it's really building on a lot of Seth's points around the public imagination. So we believe that everyone deserves to be climate safe. We believe that getting there means building communities with strong relationships to defend each other from climate impacts and renewable prosperity. And we believe that as we enter into this era of escalating climate danger, that it's the work of our lives. So we've got to own our yeses heading into 2026. People are for leadership, strength, and a plan that resonates with their values. And we saw that in the incredible response to Carney's speech last week, whatever some of the criticisms of that speech may be. The climate movement has answers for Canada in these times. And I think it is easy to get locked into some like unproductive self-doubt around that when we really have an opportunity to be focusing on where we can learn and where we can make common cause. So we have answers for Canada in these times if we focus on people. If we focus on the questions, and it'll be a bit different in all of our work. There's so many people on the line here coming from all across Canada. If we focus on, I think, 4 questions around people. Who do we serve? What do they need? What can we offer? And how can we build power together? So, what stayed the same? The climate movement needs to reach beyond the 15 to 30% of the population that it reliably reaches to the 50 to 70% that we can build power with. And I want to say a huge thank you to Re.Climate and to Eco Analytics for the 5 candidates for climate change work that's helped to really identify those different groups of Canadians and their values of priorities, especially identifying civic nationals and centrist liberals as people who care about climate and can be engaged by the climate movement if we listen to them. This is a communications and an organizing project. The metaphor that we use is of building a bridge to that climate safe future, and one that's wide enough so that we can all get there as fast as we must. And in a moment, I'll get into a little bit more detail around some of the things then that are staying the same in trying to connect in the work, in trying to connect that 50 to 70% supermajority of civic nationals and centrist liberals. Now, what's changing? So, in the context of Trump's trade and sovereignty attacks, and the incredible pressure that people are feeling in their personal affordability, anything that is perceived to stand in the way of trade diversification, foreign investment, or affordability is weakened. And that's why we're a big part of why we've been seeing so much of Carney move away from much of the work on GHG reductions and some hard-won policies like the tanker ban. In response, we can focus on connecting Canada to build clean energy with jobs and profits going to Canadians and renew momentum for climate action with a focus on defending Canadians from climate impacts, especially the people that governments think don't actually care about climate. So in 2024, in our work with Don't Let Canada Burn, we were really focused on the human impact and the leadership of wildfire survivors and wildfire fighters, a lot of collaboration with Re.Climate on that work. And we had those we amplified those folks as spokespeople, speaking through Facebook ads to civic nationals. That worked very well and resonated with people in 2024, resonated in 2025. I'm confident that that human leadership will continue to resonate. Talking about the impacts that real Canadians are facing, and we need to keep ramping that up. In 2025, we shifted to a focus on electrifying Canada's energy security in the face of Trump's trade attacks and sovereignty attacks. And we saw that civic nationals would really responded to that message about building an east-west renewable electricity grid. We saw that people responded to stories about how China is actually now leading on solar and leading on electricity and painting a pathway forward on Europe, China, India are moving forward on electricity instead of moving forward on oil in the way the United States and Russia are, that people would really respond to that. We saw over 2,000 people signed up to meet their MPs to talk about building an east-west grid and defending Canadians from climate impacts with us. And these were people outside of the climate movement. We were incredibly encouraged to see that. And I think on that campaign in particular, and coming back then to this moment and to owning our yeses and the deep emotional resonance Canadians around climate action in Canada in this time, that there was on one level that was about energy sovereignty, it's about independence, it'll continue to resonate in 2026. And then on a more fundamental level than that, when we really talk to people, part of what people just love is the idea of the provinces working together, of people working together across Canada, of getting to be part of something that is bigger than yourself and that is positive and that is trying to turn around this moment that people recognize as so like bleak and perilous in the world in this time. So I would just really encourage people to think about like owning your yeses and who it's in service of, and really happy to keep chatting through the rest of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. I think I've heard some patterns here. The shift from from both of you, Jamie and Seth, the shift from emergency, the shift from problem pointing to imagination, expanding imagination, and also economic opportunities. And the fact that climate organizations offer answers like for other issues and more work in connecting climate to other, like Amber, is that the shift you see, and what does it mean for you to lead Re.Climate in a shifting landscape, a political landscape and a policy landscape? And
yeah, thanks, Gada. Well, I think I'm going to echo some of the same themes that both Seth and Jamie have mentioned. Like where we sit, we have the fortune of being able to spend the time to sift through what if this is noise? What if what we're feeling is kind of a noise, and what if this are actual signals? And so, we serve a really wide variety of different sectors. We've got ENGOs, we've got the classic climate movement, we have all levels of government, academics, people who are really positioned in different places in the climate space, and also who have different toolboxes at their disposal, and who have different kind of objectives or goals. And so what I would say is, over the past year, being in a lot of different rooms, there were some common themes. So, part of, I think, what we do and what it means to be, at Re.Climate is, we have access to research. That's one way to kind of look at what's noise and what are signals. We have access to all of these amazing people who are doing work on the ground, who are sitting in back rooms, who are sitting at board tables, et cetera. And so kind of looking at and trying to make sense of those signals, and then trying to articulate what do we do about it is really, I think, the goal, or what we've set out for ourselves. And then just to kind of maybe echo what Seth and Jamie did, from my perspective, some things changed, and actually some things didn't change. And so from my perspective, what changed, we really did see, we're not making it up, we did see a silencing around climate, and that was both politically, but also in our media analysis that you led, Gada. I think the way that we framed it is, we're talking about climate with no context. What's causing it? What are the impacts? What are the solutions? So we have, so the kind of silencing, and even the decontextualizing of climate actually happened over the past year. I think we also saw a real shift in values among Canadians, as well as their understanding. So if you look at a few key indicators around how are we understanding, I think it's not only our research, but a number of different polls, kind of came out at different times, looking and showing this shift of around the belief that climate change is a hoax is increasing, and whatnot. So we're seeing some shifts around values and understanding. And then I think, just internally, like as professional communicators or as communicators, a lot has changed in the information environment and how influence and information circulates. And we often misinformation, disinformation, et cetera, has come out, foregrounded, or has really come out as a key problem. But upstream of that is, I think, the change fundamentally around how information and influence now circulates, and what that means. So that's, I think, what's changed. So that kind of silencing, we didn't make it up, it actually happened. There's shifts in values and understanding, information and influencing, and shifts, AI, and how it pulls information and what information it pulls, as an example. And then I think it's important to look at, what hasn't changed. And both Seth and Jamie talked about this. It's like worry and concern has not changed, right? We're actually seeing increasing concern and worry about climate change among Canadians. Support for clean energy and renewables hasn't changed. And in fact, it's increasing. And then I think what is weird, but, if you look at the work of David Coletto, but this kind of sense of precarity has settled in. Canadians now just feel like things are worse off and that they're not going to get better. And that kind of overall sense of precarity and the cost of living and et cetera has settled in, and is something that we need to respond to. So, I think if we're looking at what does that mean, I believe that there's a couple of things that we're all, seeming to gather around here is partly it's this breaking the silence around climate. Seth, you've talked about the need to talk about it. So for Re.Climate, we'll definitely be focusing on, where are Canadians and how do we better reflect their expectations? How do we better talk about how do we break through that silence? Why is it important? Why is it critical? We'll talk a bit and spend some time, I think, in the next year looking at the information ecosystem. How do institutions adapt? What does it mean to be more flexible? What can we learn from people who are on the front line, like Jamie's organization and others? What can we learn from them in how they're adapting? And what of that can, be adopted and internalized with institutions who, just have a different set of rules to live by. And what does that mean in terms of media and media ecosystem? And we'll be doing some work with David around that. And then I think this overarching narrative, and building out the public, imagination of, and really capitalizing on this, what we know where Canadians are already at or on clean energy, and how do we build out the imagination of like going from we have no choice but fossil fuels into actually we have a lot of choice and it's better and it's cleaner and it's going to give us the things that we actually want. And so centering that more in people and in choice, whether we call it a common cause, whatnot. So we'll be doing some narrative work around that. So I'll leave it there, but looking forward to the rest of this.
Thank you, Amber. And speaking of media, so I'll direct this question to David. Is like, what are the signals that you're getting from media about the kinds of climate stories, voices, and platforms that people are open to now?
Oh boy, that's a real tough one. I think the signal is resounding silence. In a sense. We've been experiencing a bit of a whiplash situation in the media. We thought the conversation was over. The Supreme Court had ruled carbon pricing was okay. There were a few provinces that were offside, but that was okay. And then COVID hit, the affordability crisis hit, and young people, the very people who were supposed to be concerned about climate change and who would be most affected by climate change, we're telling pollsters like David Coletto that they really didn't care about it. And so we were left kind of scratching our heads, thinking, well, what do we do with all of this? And then to make a long story short, Mr. Carney miraculously becomes prime minister. And we thought, okay, we're back. We're good. And then he signs an MOU and we think, well, what the hell is going on? So I think that for the media, like we're just, it's like whiplash. We're just going back and forth, back and forth. And it's very hard to plan your coverage around that. Because in a sense, you've got to follow the bouncing ball. You have to report on what's happening. You've got to report on what people are telling pollsters. But, as Seth rightly points out, you can't give up. So I think that what I try to tell what we have decided is that we're going to double down. We're going to double down. We're going to keep reminding people that climate is something to care about. That oil and gas is responsible for wildfires and these wildly fluctuating temperatures. We're going to keep doing that, but we also have to pivot, and we also have to try to meet people where they are. And if it's affordability, so be it. So there's a bit of a GST rebate that was announced at the beginning of the session on Monday. The premiers, as we speak, the premiers are meeting right now, and they're worried about affordability. So I think that we have to talk about, figure out a way to talk about electricity. And it makes sense to go and use renewables to get the cost down, but what does that really mean? And why should people care about it? These are incredibly technical issues. And before we can tell stories effectively, We have to figure out what the technical aspects are. And that's a real challenge for us. And we're still muddling our way through that. So I think that, we'll get there. And I think that we've got to follow the money. The point was made that there are countries like China and even India that are actually pivoting to clean tech. I think that, and that's where the money is going. So if we can do that, I think that we'll start to shift the conversation. We'll pivot, and we'll get people thinking beyond what we've been telling them to think about it in a new way. And so when they think about affordability, they think, oh, clean tech. Yes, that does make sense. And I think that these premiers who are meeting right now, we have to make them accountable in different ways. For example, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for Ontario Premier Doug Ford to be all in on trying to get EV investment to the largest province when he has ditched the incentives for consumers to buy EVs. Like from a policy point of view, that makes no sense. And I think that we've got to do a better job of making him accountable for that. So these are the kinds of things that we in the media have to start thinking about in terms of our news stories, our columnists, and it is a daily struggle. But I think that we have to double down because there's just, well, I mean, the alternative is not an option. So I think I'll stop there. I've come in at 4.5 minutes. I've been timing myself, and I want to leave time for questions. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And these are were great pivots. Thank you for sharing that, David. We're going to go to another level of so at the community level, and I'll direct this question to Mackenzie. And just as that the challenge of that everyone has just pointed out is that the pressures around affordability, what the priorities that people have as a community organizer. What have you learned about how to engage people on the ground and help them move towards climate action?
Thanks for the question, and thanks also for having me on this panel today. Like you said, I'm coming to this thinking about my community organizing experience on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of Métis in Saskatoon. And I guess one of the first things I think about, which others have kind of touched on as well, is how, the climate movement was at a much stronger place in 2019 and somewhat in 2020. And, since then, we've felt like we've been losing ground in a lot of ways. But people still care about climate, as others have mentioned. They're just still also concerned about, and perhaps even more concerned about, things like cost of living or, genocides happening around the world, or, toxic drug crises, or, fill in the blank. So one thing I've learned is that, to engage people in climate today, we need to be anchoring it and showing explicitly the connections between climate and these other crises. Showing how climate intersects with affordability and how, the roots of the climate crisis and, these wars are, one and the same, or, at least partially rooted in the same things. So that's one thing. And then also I think about, to make progress on all of these fronts, both like the climate justice front and the social justice fronts, we really need to be building that cross-movement solidarity. By working together and pulling people together from across these movements, we can begin to build more diverse and large coalitions that can really, combine their collective skills and experiences and people power to affect the changes that they want. A few other things that I think about how to engage and kind of keep people in climate is really centering our work on, joy, hope, and community. Thinking back on the last year or two of my own organizing, some of the most successful events and campaigns we've had have just been ones that have been fun to be a part of. Um, I think especially after the pandemic, people, and I think particularly like Gen Z, are kind of tired of this online only organizing and climate work, and they want to be getting in person and having fun and building community. So I think that's really important to center. But to the point of, fostering hope, I think that is really essential as well. Um, I've talked to some people who just feel like the ship has sailed on climate and that we're past the tipping points and there's nothing they can do, or else, they're so overwhelmed by like working two jobs and trying to make ends meet that they just feel paralyzed and they maybe very realistically can't do all that much in their circumstance. But I think we need to show that hope is still possible and that, changes are happening. They're, maybe happening more so right now in other countries, but they're happening every day and people can still be a part of that. Um, and just to a last point, I guess, to emphasize the importance of building community, I think of this climate work as both kind of a marathon and a sprint. And I think the only way to really get through that amid everything else that's going on is to, build cultures of care and, build communities that can sustain each other and care for each other throughout all of this. So that's kind of what I come back to about how to engage and mobilize people, cross movement solidarity and fostering hope and joy and community. Thanks.
Love that, Mackenzie, like joy, hope, and community. Um, would you like, can you share an example of how do you do that? How, like, from your work, how did you get these elements into your work?
Yeah, I mean, a more recent example, I guess, is we have this ongoing event series called Bite Size Change, where we get together around a shared meal and there's some kind of like topic that we either kind of focus on or maybe an action as well that we engage in. So last summer, for example, we did a bite-sized change on building DIY air filters. And we also had somebody from the Canadian Association for Physicians of the Environment come and talk to people about other ways they can protect themselves and their communities during wildfires. And so that was really cool to do. And some other things we've done, we've like collaborated with a local makerspace in having kind of a table set up at their weekly repair cafe, where we've been telling people about this recent campaign we've done around like this postcard drive leading up to the local budget talks. And yeah, so just some of those things around. And I guess other things I've heard of too that people have done of things like heat pump parties or like earth festivals, zine making workshops, things like that I've heard have been quite successful.
Thank you. Thank you, Mackenzie. So we'll start with the questions we're getting from people. I have here the first questions, which is from Letha. And the question, I'll direct this to you, Amber. Like on the move of like municipalities pulling back on climate sustainability funding and departments. What can you say about this?
Well, I could say a lot. I'll try to keep it focused. I think I'm going to take the outside perspective and the inside perspective. I think the inside perspective, to be fair to local elected officials, is that they are surrounded, I would say, in a surround sound with opposition often. Opposition groups are quite well organized, both online, but also locally. And so when we talk to elected officials, it is quite quite normal for them to have visits and to have opposition show up, et cetera, and ask kind of where are the supporters? Why are they not, in my office and also talking to me? So I think on the inside, to be fair for elected officials, they are trying to navigate a very real tension of How do you take limited dollars and shrinking dollars, and do you spend that on potholes? Do you spend that on rebates? Do you spend it on, et cetera? And kind of, I think the bridge here is often these programs have a bit of a brand problem, right? The green premium, the climate luxury, the we're just giving, it's just more money going to people, who can already afford lots of things. So, for I think local governments and for elected officials, they're really trying in a difficult situation to navigate the tension between long-term investment, long-term shifts in electrifying their cities, et cetera, with the very short term. And then, throwing in the mix a whole bunch of like really practical
Mm,
things around signposts and potholes and that kind of stuff. I think on the outside, the silencing, we as a movement can do a much better job at being much more clear about where is their support. How much support is there? What exactly are we asking for? And then show up in those spaces privately, whether it's one-to-one meetings with elected officials and administrators, or whether it's more publicly, and make that known, make the community understand our community wants this, they care about it, and make it very practical in terms of how many millions of people or how many
mm,
hundreds of people in your community. So break that kind of social norm, show them what the support is, get specific about your ask, get in their offices and in front of them, and help them to see and break through this kind of surround sound that I think
mm,
opposition has focused, and get specific about the ask, and make sure that it appreciates, I think, the tension and the real experience that they're having around harassment, threats, needing to weigh a lot of different priorities all at the same time, and that they're fighting against a brand problem in which climate and those climate programs are seen to be a premium and a luxury, and long term, and not a priority right now, the delay. So I think there's more to say about it, but those are the things that come to mind.
thank you. Wonderful. And this question is for it's for you, Seth. And also, like, David, I think if you want to jump in this question, is the linking the climate crisis, um, uh, linking the climate crisis with other crises, like the embrace, for example, of AI. So there's evidence that energy costs for people are rising because of the AI servers. But also that the other crisis that this question describes is the links or the disregard for the links between cultural environment and natural environment.
Yeah, well, this was a point I was trying to make, which is we win when we make links. I did my own polling with Abacus when I was writing my book, and granted, this is a few years ago, but I wanted to test, okay, well, first of all, what do people think about these truly bold climate ideas? And then I asked, well, would your support go up or down if we were also doing these bold things that tackle affordability and inequality and all these kinds of things? The support for the climate policies didn't go down when we linked it. It went through the goddamn roof. Like, this is how we win.
Mm,
Um, to the point on AI, absolutely. We should be alive to all of these opportunities to make connections. People, I think there's a deep-seated anxiety about AI out there, and a lot of it well-grounded. Um, and we should be speaking to it and making those connections, as the questioner is saying, to this incredible consumption of water and energy, and in turn, to affordability. So now we're all
mm,
going to have to compete with these data centers for the price of electricity. Um, so there's an opening, but it's one of many. Like, I think people don't yet understand how the climate crisis is linked to not future, but current affordability challenges in terms of the cost of food, in terms of their home insurance premiums. And on the solution side, we have so much opportunity to talk about how truly ambitious climate policies will bring down our energy costs, will bring down our transportation costs. Um, we all, on this call, we're all deep in the mix, and we think, we hear about this a lot. Most of the public does not. And I mean, this is Amber's point. There has been a silencing. I've found quite helpful the work of Potential Energy in the States, this other climate communications group, and listening to their founder, an interview I highly recommend with Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson on her podcast, What If We Get It Right, where he was pointing out that while the support for climate is strong, um, people aren't aware of the solutions. They don't know there's a scientific consensus. They don't know how it's linked to these increase in costs. Um, and to Amber's point, in the last year, the mainstream media reporting of climate hasn't just decreased, it's taken a nosedive. So people aren't hearing about it, and we all take our social cues from others and the world around us in what we, so there's what we privately worry about, but we only give that expression if we're getting the social cues out there from others that tell us we're not alone.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of pick up on the AI, which is rather fortuitous. I had the enormous pleasure of being an honor of being a judge in a contest sponsored by the Investigative Reporters and Editors in the States. It's named after Philip Meyer, who was a pioneer in data journalism, in journalism that uses social science techniques to tell stories. One of the and although I can't give away the winners, I can tell you that one of the stories that really impressed us was by Bloomberg, and it was a series of stories that took a look at the effect that these huge data centers were having on the environment. That they were able to map out the locations of these data centers in not only in the United States but around the world, to show that they were very close to areas that were experiencing a lot of poverty when it came to access to water. So they were sucking up a lot of water. They were able to show that where these AI centers, where these data centers were positioned, that actually electricity costs had gone up for a lot of people in the areas. And I don't want to scoop myself, but that's the direction that we want to head. And that's the direction that I would challenge a lot of my media compatriots to head as well. We've got to become more investigative, more inquisitive. We've got to follow the money. These are the kind of stories that we've got to be telling, in addition to the other stories we've been telling, to get people thinking that these things are coming and they have not only an impact on the environment, but your pocketbook, right? So that's how we can get to the affordability piece and climate at the same time. The other thing that I try to stress to, and it became really clear to me, is that we used to think that there were kind of a couple of departments that were really intrinsic to what we care about. And there was an ECCC, right? Environment, natural resources, and maybe one other. But when you think about it, it's every department. It's finance, right? It's the Privy Council office. It's the fisheries. It's the public safety, Health Canada, DND now, right? And so we have to forget about having climate specialists in a lot of newsrooms, and every reporter in every beat has to be thinking about climate and connecting the dots. And I think that once we kind of democratize our coverage, we'll see more of the kinds of stories that I'm talking about. So I think that I would like to end this just by saying that I think that there's, for us in the media landscape, there is an opportunity. And as an educator, I think that if we can pass on these methodologies to our students, hopefully we'll have a new generation of storytellers that can see climate in a more holistic way than the way it tends to be pigeonholed right now in some of the newsrooms that I've worked in.
And the National Observer has done a lot of investigative stories that
and we will continue to, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. This question is for you, Jamie, is that can you share how you identified and targeted civic nationals and centrist liberals?
Thanks, Gata. This builds on a couple of different points from before this question. One was there was a question in the chat around what channels are we looking at heading into 2026, um, and so part of our work on this has been actually just using Facebook. And so this is taking a step back in 2024 and 2025. Particularly, Facebook remains a place of very high engagement, particularly a lot of rural communities across Canada. It also has fairly powerful tools in terms of being able to like identify an audience that maps onto a geography and a set of interests that are then correspond to the profile of civic nationals or centrist liberals as identified by Amber and our friends and other friends at Re.Climate and Eco Analytics. So part of that is just being about using digital ads to reach those audiences. And then that provides a pretty powerful listening tool, like what resonates, what doesn't resonate. Like the most powerful ad that we had, the most effective ad that we put out in 2026, is still this kind of 2025, it still blows my mind, was two charts next to each other. And the one chart was Canada as a renewable energy superpower, and it showed hydroelectricity superpower, and it showed Canada above the US. And the other chart was solar should be next, and it was Canada as this like tiny little blip at the bottom, and like zooming off into the distance. And that deeply resonated with folks. So we've started with Facebook. Now, problems with Facebook. So many. Where to begin? Where to begin with the problems with Facebook? It feels a little bit like reaching into the matrix and trying to extract people. So in this year, where we're shifting is I think what Amber was speaking to around really recognize how the information environment is changing. That the information environment is splintered. People are getting their information across like all kinds of different channels. And people are being inundated with disinformation, including AI generated content. I think we're all seeing so many people sharing like false AI generated content at this point. And that is particularly true for folks who are civic nationals and centrist liberals who are out in a lot of these communities that are going to be at the core of these fights. So the big shift for us in 2026, and I'm going to drop a link at the end to as a bit of a sign up to be part of a learning community around this, and we'll be collaborating with other folks on it, is towards moving away from or complementing, like, yes, continue to use digital ads because it can allow you to reach outside of your bubble, which is really powerful. And having done that and connected with people, then connecting with those folks, training them, empowering them to be their own champions in their own communities. So that they can spread messages and listen within their own networks and within their own communities and within the channels that make sense and work for them. So that shift from a like targeted broadcast to a network and to an ecosystem, which is like how you can connect with people and how you can have serious influence in these times and have relationships and listen to folks. And so that for us is about the creation of an Amplify network that is supporting these local champions across the country to speak through their social media channels and then share lessons from that.
Thank you, Jamie. I wonder, is just commenting this, a lot of research pointing to filter bubbles, not within social platforms, but from one to another. So Facebook, you'll find like conservative, you'll find them in this but website. Well, on X, for example, well, Facebook, is that something that you have witnessed, or it just that there's a variety that you can, for example, Facebook can be a space where you find the 5 segments or um, uh, specific segments on specific websites.
Yeah, Facebook specifically still has, it skews older at this point, by quite a lot. And also initially, like that's been more of our, like say, civic nationals also skew older. So if you're focusing on trying to find civic nationals, then civic nationals who skew older, and particularly rural civic nationals, then like Facebook is a particularly good channel for that. If your goal is to reach a different audience, say like a younger audience, you may towards TikTok. If you're wanting to get to centrist liberal young men, you may want to focus more on YouTube. So there are like different profile, like different like demographic and interest profiles for those different channels. And this stuff is like not hard to figure out. Like we live in an age that is just like flooded with content marketing about like where people are on the internet. So you're like two Google searches away from the answer to a question at that level, especially
Mhm.
backed up by the really solid hard research like the Five Canada stuff that Eco-Analytics and Re.Climate has put out. So I will say though, then going back to Facebook, that part of the advantage of a platform like Facebook is that, and unlike say Blue Sky is a great place to go to talk to other progressives. And there is
Mhm.
value in that. Absolutely. We should be doing that. And people were talking, there was a comment in the chat about having a like Canada only social media network. I think those are like good questions and we should be thinking about developing that. And at the same time, we want to avoid pigeonholing ourselves to only talking to ourselves, which is the
Mhm.
risk of a place like Blue Sky, and to be consciously thinking, how am I getting outside of my bubble and speaking to people who don't already agree with us. And that is where
Mhm.
there are advantages to like those different social media channels that weren't brought together by like wanting to um, have an
Mhm.
only progressive only echo chamber.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to jump in very quickly and say that one of the ways that we get people thinking outside their bubbles is to get them thinking differently about the effects of climate change. Like, you take a look at your electricity bill, start asking questions. Why is it going up? These kinds of things. And I think that we as storytellers have to plug into some of that stuff as well, which means that we've got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of work to do. But I think that if you reach people where they are and speak to them in
Mhm.
a language they understand, they're going to come back to this. They care about this. It's not that they don't
Yeah.
care. It's just that it's not top of mind right now, and we've got to make it top of mind.
Yeah,
Everyone
I
cares
just
about electricity, what they pay for. If it's linked to a data center, you're going to care about that. You're going to want accountability.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just want to echo this. I think that we need to fully appreciate we have a limited amount of attention, and it's very hard to earn, and it's very hard to get. And
Mhm.
when you get them, don't spend it talking about how a policy works. Talk
Mhm.
about what it means for them and why we're doing it. Why does this matter? Why are we doing this? How does this mean? What will this mean for you? Please, we need to spend less time with the precious, hard-earned attention of people talking about how a policy or a technology or et cetera works, and more about, what does it mean and why does it matter?
Oh, wonderful. Mackenzie is like, there's a question here. I'd love to convene community climate conversation in Cochrane, Alberta. How might we dream, deliver, and create the future that we want? Any thoughts or suggestions?
In Cochrane, Alberta.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up mainly in Edson, Alberta, so I have some experience dealing with, rural Alberta landscape. And it can be tough, but I think one way to go about it may be to try and find the places in your community or the organizations that might have overlapping interests and try to build maybe an event or maybe an ongoing, community of practice where you gather and talk about these kinds of things. Um, in Saskatoon, like I mentioned, we did this postcard campaign recently in which we had a table at this local repair cafe that was happening every week. And so we were talking to people who were coming in who, were obviously concerned about waste and cared about their impact on the planet. And many of them hadn't heard of any of our organizations before, but we attracted them to join this campaign that way. And we also set up our postcards at some like-minded businesses, a bookstore, and then a used or secondhand clothing and maternity wear store, and postcards in both, but just basically like all of them were taken up. So I think even in like more rural areas or more conservative areas, there can be places where you can find common cause and just trying to build connections with those people and then getting together to try and build bigger and dream bigger together.
So, and just, building on that, dreaming bigger, this question, we got it from actually the registrants. So polls only measure what people think is politically possible. How can climate comms be used to expand horizons? And this question is for everyone. Seth.
I think that, first of all, the question is raising a really important point, which is, again, polling tells us where people are at, but it's also a reflection of what people are taking as their social cues. I mean, I want to give you this is a very unscientific answer, but I've done a lot of door knocking in the last year for different political candidates, and I do my own little social experiment. When I'm at the door, the opening question is usually, "What issues or concerns are most top of mind for you?" And no one ever says climate. What they basically say is the same thing they tell the pollsters. They talk about affordability or the healthcare crisis or Trump. But then if I say I'm worried about climate, it's like the floodgates open and people are like, me too. And I've suddenly given them permission to admit that they harbor this. And I do also want to caution, David was mentioning earlier about some of the distressing youth poll results. Let me just offer the caveat that the polling stuff is muddy. First of all, in terms of young people, there's a huge gender divide. Um, uh, but it does show that people are concerned. It shows low climate literacy, like people don't know the connection between climate and fossil fuels. And so you end up with these confusing results. I'm worried about climate, I want more action, but I'm okay with this pipeline because half the public doesn't understand how those are connected. And on that gender piece, again, there's this possibility to blow open people's sense of imagination. It's 2 years old, but we also commissioned from Abacus 2 years ago polling on the Youth Climate Corps, and it was through the roof. In particular, among young people, and most interesting, perhaps, it's the only climate poll I've ever seen where the enthusiasm among young men outstripped young women. That there was something in the offer. It relates to this earlier point that was just said, that I think Amber just said, like, we have to stop boring people with all these technical details. When we make an offer to just roll up your sleeves and do something big together, people are like, yeah, I've been waiting for my invitation. And we get this positive result.
No, I mean, I think that's, I want to just acknowledge the work that Jamie's done and others have done. The part of this is inviting people in, and having the right people make the invitation, and giving people something to do. We'll have lots more about this kind of coming out over the next month or so. But the degree to which you feel like you can do something and you think that other people like you want to do this thing, has a huge impact on your level of support and your level of engagement. So these topics of public imagination, of agency, and feeling like you can do something, of feeling like it matters, feeling like other people like you care about this and want it too, are hugely important. And as we don't talk about it and we just let people sit in uncertainty and silence, the more we're going to see disengagement and all of these indicators going in the wrong direction. Gotta, at the risk of being not following the format, there was an earlier question here that I'd be really curious to know where other people on this call are at. And so this is Ken Love asking about, pro fossil fuel, anti climate comments flooding media, and media articles and media sites. And so I think that there's lots of different ways into this question, not least of which who's on a media site and actually then making the effort to read it and go beyond a headline, I think is a question that, raises for me. What's the power? But I think this idea of like, what are we all doing? I'd be very curious to know for all of you, what are you doing to deal with the haters? Because I think that it's a real piece, and it speaks back to maybe Mackenzie's point around care and community of care. And how are we taking care of each other? And how are, and what are you doing to deal with the haters? Sorry to break rank, but yeah.
No, that's okay. Can you repeat the question though one more
Yeah,
time?
how are you all in your work? Have
Mhm.
you, or will you, or do
Mhm.
you deal with the haters, whether they're bots, whether they show up in meetings, whether they, in whatever form. And I'm looking at you, Jamie, for some reason.
Okay. It's true that we put ourselves in spaces where there's lots of haters, although I'm sure that that's also true for many of everybody else on this panel, in different ways. So, I'll just say two quick things on our end and then pass it on. Quick thing number one is that part of it is platforming and supporting spokespeople that are not the folks that the haters are primed to hate. And so it is a lot harder to be such a jerk to a wildfire disaster survivor or a wildfire fighter, or to somebody whose job is to build clean energy and is on the front lines in that way. And I think really focusing on centering folks who are on the front line in that way is very powerful. We talk a lot in our work with our list about Indigenous firefighters, and the work that they're doing to protect communities as an example. And then, of course, in the community of care, you have to then support those people in the face of the backlash that they may get. But that definitely helps to reduce the backlash. I think there's a second question, which goes to this point around the information environment that we're operating in, which is to understand that much of the internet is dead and is actually bots, and that there are limits to solutions to technical problems. And I think that's where there's a new area of inquiry for us as part of a Defense Against Disinformation project. And we're collaborating with a bunch of great folks around this. Sylvia, I saw your note in the comments on it around, do we create our own bot networks for good? Like, what are the at scale responses to that deal with the reality that much of the hatred that we're experiencing is actually not human, and requires a new approaches to deal with that. Yeah, but I'm super curious about what other folks have to say on it.
One of the challenges for us, we've been doing a lot of work about disinformation, and we've built a tool that scrapes the Facebook Meta ad library, and we're able to kind of parse out information in different subject areas and whatnot. And one of the problems that we encounter is that yeah, there are a lot of bots, but there's a lot of stuff circulating, and you don't know who's behind it. You suspect, who might be behind it, and we've done those kinds of stories, but that's a really big problem when it comes to transparency, and we call out Meta on that, and I think we will continue to call that out, and I think that what you're starting to see is that there's a lot more pressure on social media networks that go beyond just the influence of young people. And I think that issues like transparency have to become an issue. And so those are the kind of drums that we can continue to beat from a story perspective and demand some accountability. And again, change the conversation, pivot. It's one thing to be criticized, and that's fine. Um, we live in a democracy. But we need to know where the criticism is coming from, who's behind it. Who is the puppet master behind the curtain pulling the strings? We need to know that. And right now we don't. And there are policies that allow social media networks to do that and to get away with it.
Thank you. So I'll have one. So there's one more question, and we just want to give good time for that question. It's just to ground us. It's like, what has helped you stay grounded last year? And this question, I'm sure it's important for everyone, but also for me. And what are your goals for 2026? I'll start with you,
Sure. Um, so what grounds me, I think, what I already kind of touched on a little bit is my community. There's groups of people who I meet with every week, and they really help keep me going even when, times are hard and it feels like we're going backwards. I guess what also grounds me is just reflecting on even the really small victories that we have and celebrating those. And I guess some of the things that I am hoping we can focus on more in 2026 is doing more of that cross-movement solidarity I was speaking about, doing more joy-centered work. And, another thing I'll just mention that we are looking to do is we're actually appealing a court decision right now. Climate Justice Saskatoon is an intervener in a case in Saskatchewan in which 7 residents and Climate Justice Saskatoon were suing the government of Saskatchewan, kind of making the case that expanding and continuing fossil fuel gas power is, infringing on our rights. And the courts dismissed that case in October, but we've appealed it in November, and we're hoping to hear that case in the beginning half of this year. So that's another thing we're looking forward to.
Thank you. Amber?
Yeah, what grounds me? I mean, I think the accepting that change is constant and inevitable and not wanting it to be something different is perhaps core. So opening yourself. So for me, anyhow, personally, I think it's the idea there's a certain amount of vulnerability, a certain amount of humility that comes with understanding that you don't have it figured out. This is hard. Other people are struggling with it, and just to accept that. Accept that we don't know what we don't know, and there's stuff that we just don't know. And I think that that kind of moves you into a sense of being open and curious. And, I'm so curious, Jamie, about, this thing that you've described, and kind of listening and being in conversation with people. I think the other thing that, I just have this wickedly smart and wonderful team of people around me, and I get to wake up every day doing the thing that I love to do, which is, using my little basket of communications to try to figure out, what I think is one of the most important challenges and issues of our time. So my team being able to do what I like to do and focusing it on the challenge that I think is important, and just kind of, I guess, being open to the fact that this is hard, and it's not going to never not be hard. So you might as well just relax into it and go with it. And then I think some of my goals for Re.Climate anyhow is really leaning into this no choice, moving from a no choice to choices, so kind of what's the better, cheaper choice around renewables, and that kind of narrative work and public imagination work. We'll definitely be doing some work around breaking the silence and looking more at that. And then I think, what does it mean? What can we learn from people who are adapting to this new way of how information moves and how influence moves? What can we learn? And then how do we make sense of that and feed it back into all of the people in our network and the institutions who are trying to and need to adapt, because their expertise is valuable and it matters. So there'll be some training around that, and we'll have some things. So kind of keep an eye out for breaking the silence, choices and narrative work, and keep an eye out for some of this age of influence and information, and what it means and how to adapt.
Perfect. Seth?
Let me take your questions in reverse order on goals. Now that we've closed the climate emergency unit, I'm gainfully unemployed. But I will say that on this question of young men, given that that is the largest base of support for the populist right, and yet, as we've discussed, you see these Mamdani results, the YCC poll results, tells us that it is possible to make a different offering. And so I'm noodling over a project that somehow tackles and speaks to that. I just don't know what it looks like yet. As far as staying grounded, I'm probably the wrong guy to ask, other than think about, trying to get sleep and swim and listen to good music. The truth is, I'm not terribly optimistic about what we're up against right now. And so people have probably heard me say this before, but I fall back on this quote I like from the American climate scientist Kate Marvel, who says the challenge we're up against doesn't need optimists, it needs heroes, by which she means people with the resolve to do what needs to be done without the
Mhm.
assurance of a successful outcome.
Hmm. David and Jamie.
I think what keeps me grounded is the fact that if you take a look at history, journalism has mattered and will continue to matter, and so that grounds me. I
Mm,
think that for 2026, I will steal Amber's phrase. I will become more curious. And, I think that there are some of the trends that we've been talking about that we need to follow, find new ways to tell stories, learn and learn how to get into the weeds, pull out what you need, and tell people what they need to know and link it to affordability. Link it to the everyday things that they take for granted, like how much it costs for them to
mm,
keep the lights on. The effect that climate change has on food prices and the supply chain. Those are the kinds of things that we have to get better at doing.
okay. Thank you, David. Jamie.
Thank you. I think Seth, beautiful quote. I think you've inspired me to remember a quote of my own that sums up what kept me grounded in 2025. Or it's not my quote; it's a quote, Paul Hawken quote from years and years ago, which was that when is he optimistic or pessimistic? When he reads the reports, he's pessimistic. When he meets the people, he's optimistic. Um,
Mhm.
and I think I've really felt that way in 2020. That was very grounding. That in talking to climate disaster survivors, in talking to the people who are building clean energy and benefiting their communities from that, that makes you optimistic, or it makes you grounded in the work and in the bravery that is required. Optimism as well in seeing the response that we're getting when we reach outside the bubble and ask people, do you want to have renewable
Mm,
energy community benefit agreements that would support your community forever, or do you want to pay for oil forever? And they say, we want renewable energy with community benefit agreements, not the opposite of that, or talk about their concern around disinformation. And seeing
perfect.
that really like grounded support for work that is at the intersection of climate and people's desire for agency and connection and affordability in their lives. The last thing I'll say then for 2026, we'll continue the work, Don't Let Canada Burn, around supporting wildfire fighters and building renewable energy, electrify Canada's energy security, about bringing Canadians together with an east-west grid, major renewable energy projects like Wind West in Atlantic
Mhm.
Canada that can deliver generational prosperity, and to ground that in 2026, a organizing network that can build on a lot of it. Mackenzie, what you were describing of like good, fun events that bring people together around building climate resilience. I loved your like heat pump parties. And the DIY air kits is a piece that we've done a fair bit of. And then the other piece around building this amplification network so that we can be
Mhm.
supporting people to be local champions, champions with their communities, whether even if they're non-local, and messengers in that way, and learn from them in real time. Anyway, thank you
Perfect.
so much again for this
I'm just
session.
going to do
Thank
a
you,
hot
everyone.
pursuit. I'm sorry, Gada. I would be remiss if I did not say that watch Re.Climate for a huge amount of work coming out around building social acceptance for wind and large scale transmission. So lots to come on that around how do we build public support, and where are Canadians around building out, actually building the kind of renewable projects that are needed to transition. So.
Awesome. So that's probably this is the conclusion. Thank you so much. This was a great session, truly. We learned so much, and thank you for joining us. To people coming here from joining us from different provinces, and there is a survey link. Please fill out the survey and keep in touch with us. And as Amber said, we'll be having more in the coming months. So, bye everyone.
Thank you.